Hello, and welcome to this week's assembly. This week's assembly is a celebration of Black History Month. I was really glad to be asked to do this assembly because I've always felt as an historian that our history is not very inclusive, and sometimes it feels very much like the history in our schools and our country is the history of white people, often white men. So I was really pleased to be asked to do the assembly. But strangely, having done the assembly last year on Black Lives Matter, I found it incredibly difficult to know what to talk about this time. I felt like some of the things in that Black Lives Matter assembly are still so massively relevant now, but I struggled with whether it should be the same again. However, when I looked at the Black History Month website in preparation for doing this, one phrase really struck me, and that's this across the top here: "No, the past shaped the future." And it occurred to me, although there was a massive movement in the direction of acknowledging the difficulties that Black people in countries all over the world and this country have experienced, that is not something that should just be talked about 1 year and then be done with. And I did think about the fact that, as you can see in the little graphic here, you know, people became very, very interested and acknowledged the idea of systemic and structural racism for the first time, probably. But yeah, just a mere 12 months on, and and look at the picture of Marcus Rashford there, and you think about some of the comments made to the England players after the Euros, it kind of felt like this was something that still needed to be done, this stories that needed to be told. So what I'm going to do is, this assembly is just going to be a few stories, some of which you may know, some of which you might not, but I think they're important stories to be told. So first is the story of Emmett Till. Emmett Till was murdered on August the 28th, 1955. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy. He lived in Chicago, but he had family in the Deep South. He had cousins in the Deep South in Mississippi. Now, he was killed in fact, brutally murdered for allegedly flirting with a white woman. Now, his murderers, the woman's white husband and his brother, made Emmett carry a 75-pound cotton gin fan to the bank of the Tallahatchie River, ordered him to take off his clothes, and then beat him near to death, gouged out his eye, shot him in the head, and then threw his body tied to the cotton gin fan with barbed wire into a river. Now, Emmett Till had grown up in Chicago, and although he'd gone to a segregated school, I don't think he had any idea of the extent of the segregation and racism that he would encounter in Mississippi. And his mother had told him to, be very, very careful down there. But of course, like all 14-year-old boys, he didn't really appreciate the extent of this. So Emmett Till was with his cousins, and he was outside the country, outside a store. And he was talking to his friends, and he was bragging to his friends that his girlfriend back home was white. This would be something that would be unheard of in the South. So basically, his friends, disbelieving him, think there's no way this could be true, dared him to ask the woman in the store for a date. Now, Emmett Till went in and he bought some candy, and he left the store and was heard to say "bye, baby" to the lady in the store, Carolyn Bryant. Now, she later told her husband that he had grabbed her, made lewd advances at her, and wolf whistled at her. When her husband found out about this, Rob Bryant and his brother, his half-brother, J.W. Millen, found out. They went to the home of Emmett Till's uncle, who he was staying with, Moses Wright, in the early hours of August the 28th, and they demanded to see the boy at gunpoint. And despite pleas from his uncle, they forced Emmett into their car and drove him to the Tallahatchie River. Now, 3 days later, his corpse was finally recovered, but it was so disfigured that even his uncle Moses Wright could only identify it by a ring that he wore with his initials. The authorities wanted to bury the body quickly as they could without any fuss, but his mother, Mamie Bradley, requested it be sent back to Chicago. Now, the images on this next slide are very shocking. I'll warn you in advance, but I think they're important to be seen. So you can see this very graphic picture of Emmett Till's corpse and what he looked like, barely recognisable as a person anymore. His mother believed that his life had to have meaning, and that if nothing else, it could ignite a feeling against the incredibly horrific racism that was prevalent. And she made the very, very brave decision of publishing the pictures of her son looking like that. Also, when the funeral was held, she took the unusual decision of having an open casket funeral. That means that the top half of the casket was open and people could file past and look. And she wanted to make sure that this was, that her son and what had happened to him was recognised. So 2 weeks later, Millam and Bryant went on trial, the two men who had murdered Emmett Till. They went on trial, but despite overwhelming evidence, within 1 hour of the jury sitting to decide, they issued a verdict of not guilty, saying that the state had failed to prove the identity of the body of Emmett Till. And this caused, obviously, great outrage across America that these two men had walked out of court scot-free. Now, the story didn't end there, though, because Emmett Till's family talked about in national media about the importance of that, and said that it was important for people to understand how the single word of a white person against a black person was law, and the fact that despite the overwhelming evidence, it didn't matter, because a white woman had said it and he was a black boy, then that was it. Then he was guilty in the eyes of the jury. The final, I think, sad end to this story is that over 50 years later, Carolyn Bryant, as you can see in the picture there, in 2007, recanted her testimony, admitting that he had never touched her, threatened her, or harassed her, saying that nothing that boy did could ever justify what happened to him. Now, I wanted to tell another story that was much more closer to our time, in fact, in the lifetime of everybody who will be watching this assembly, just to show, in some respects, how little progress had been made over the next 60 or 70 years. So, this is the story of Trayvon Martin. He was murdered 26th of February 2012. And something called racial profiling had a massive part in that. Racial profiling, for those that you don't know what it is the act of suspecting or targeting or discriminating against a person on the basis of their ethnicity or religion rather than on individual suspicion. In other words, Trayvon Martin was immediately more suspicious to his killer because he was black. I want to tell you a little bit of the story of Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin, who had no criminal record, was shot and killed by a neighborhood watch member in his community in Florida, George Zimmerman. And actually, he was initially, on the night of the killing of Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman was released without any charge at all. And only after a massive social media protest, was it even decided to take him to court. Now, again, a jury acquitted him of murder. And this single event, has a massive role in the beginning of Black Lives Matter becoming prominent in America. Now, Trayvon Martin was a good student. He'd taken an honours class in English, though his favourite subject was maths. He was tall, he was athletic. He was described as very quiet, but really interested in aviation, looking at the science of flying, and wanted one day to become a pilot. Now, in response to a number of robberies and burglaries in the community that George Zimmerman lived in, there was a neighbourhood watch set up. But unlike a neighbourhood watch in this country, Zimmerman was actually licensed to carry a firearm. Now, between August 2011 and February 2012, Zimmerman called the police several times talking about suspicious individuals. He kept on talking to the police about suspicious individuals in his neighbourhood. And I think the key thing for this is, in every single occasion that he talked about an individual being suspicious, all of them were reported as black males. So, on the night of February 26th, Trayvon Martin had been to the store. He was seen on video acting completely normally, buying Skittles and iced tea. Now, as he left the store, he was followed by Zimmerman from his car, who believed that he looked, again, this phrase he used before, a suspicious guy. Now, Trayvon Martin, who was on the phone to his girlfriend at that time, was aware that he was being followed by this car. He didn't know why, and quite naturally was scared and started to run. Now, despite the police telling Zimmerman not to get out of his car, not to follow Trayvon Martin, he disregarded this and he pursued the team. Okay, and actually, although in the alley there he was shot, well, and we'll never know what happened. This confrontation ended with Zimmerman shooting Trayvon Martin in the chest, and he died less than 100 yards away from the house in which he'd been staying. Now, he was charged with second-degree murder, Zimmerman, in April 2012. But in July 2013, following a 4-week trial, he was acquitted. Now, the picture that you see on the right was, and there were lots of different versions of this in America at the time, because Zimmerman on the left had talked about Trayvon Martin as being suspicious looking, and that was on the basis of two things: the colour of his skin and the fact he wore a hoodie. So you can see the protests that came out as a result of this. These are two stories, and I think both of them not only show the mistreatment of black people in America, but also the whole idea that someone can immediately be suspicious because of the colour of the skin. Now, I just want to take it right back to the present day, because I think it's very tempting, isn't it, to think, well, you know, the world really sat up and took notice after the murder of George Floyd. But I think this is there's still a fight to be fought here, because if we look at this, we know how incredibly proud we were of the England squad during the Euros, and actually, you know, the fact that as a team, black and white, they took the knee despite boos in some quarters. But the abuse that Marcus Rashford and other players received as after the game really put into perspective the fact that racism is still there and will rear its ugly head. Okay. Now, although the FA came out with these very strongly worded statements about the disgust they felt about the abuse that the players had received and social media and how it's not welcome, it still showed that racism is there and prevalent in this country at times. Now, because I don't want to leave it at a really, really depressing point, because I do believe in the power of change. I do believe that people can make things better. I want to show you this. Now, this mural's in Wivington in Manchester, and this was done a few years ago. It was a mural for Mark of Rashford. He's from Wivington. He was a hero for the area, and on the night of the England game, you can see the black bags are covering up abuse that was put on there, but just so that we don't feel that that's it, and the people that feel like this are winning. I really like what happened next. So we can see that people in Manchester decided to stand tall, decided that this wasn't okay to do this, and then we show you that it started off with the black bags that had covered up the racist abuse being covered with all of these messages from well wishers, and you can see by the end of the next day what it was like. Okay, and this statement from Andy Burnham, who is the Lord Mayor of Manchester, said, "We could not be more proud of Marcus Rashford and his role in taking his country its first major final in 55 years. So really, really important there that people did stand up and be counted, did make the stand against racism. This as well, which I really love. My all-time hero, Ted Lasso, someone who truly, truly believes in the goodness of people and the ability to make people better. He's an American actor. He makes a TV program over this country. He was a loose affiliation to what had happened, but he decided the next day to come out at the premiere of the second season of Ted Lasso with this T-shirt showing support for the England players. And I love this tweet next to it that was said about him, is it, he did this because he can, and that's the important bit. And I think the message of this assembly is that the world can be better, that racism can be made to disappear one day, but only if we all decide that we can make a difference. Okay, thank you very much for listening to my assembly.